And now, after having studied the Bhagavad Gita, a couple of the Upanishads, Vivek Chudamani, so having studied many of those texts, I think this time our study uh, of the Yoga Sutra would be a little more useful, little more effective. Incidentally, in our tradition, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Yoga Sutras, we keep coming back. So I have seen this in the teaching methodology. Whereas so many other subjects one may continue. For example, a person may study the Vedangas, which is Shiksha Shastra, which is how to pronounce the Veda. Then they may study Chandas, which is the meter, and then they may study Nirukta, that is etymology, or Vyakarana, which is grammar, and then Jyotisha. Jyotisha also very important Vedanga. So they may study Jyotisha. A little more specialization also can be done by taking up Kalpa, which means how to perform the various rituals. So these are the 6 Vedangas. People may do that, but every time they go and study a Vedanga, they will come back to study Yoga Sutra definitely. Even if they don't come back for one of the same Upanishads they have studied or so, but then Yoga Sutra is repeatedly studied. Then a person also may try to study the darshanas. Again, there are 6 important darshanas. The most ancient of darshana means to see. Darshana also means philosophy. Darshana also means a philosophical thesis. So one may also take up specialized study of the darshanas, which I do recommend that we do that. Take a good overview of each one of the 6 branches of philosophy. They are all complementary to each other. Even to understand Vedanta, a background of the rest of the darshanas are quite critical. So it could be the cosmology that is discussed, and the method of knowing, and what are the proofs of knowledge as propounded in Sankhya of Kapila is one of the darshanas very critical for the understanding of Yoga Sutra. Then we have Yoga Darshana itself by Patanjali. Then we have the Nyaya Darshana, which is we are talking about logic and how to use our everyday experience and then extrapolate it into a philosophical experience. One of the classic examples they give is, say, the mirage. So pretty much everybody has seen a mirage or they know about a mirage. It is where we, at one combination of light, heat, and then the particular location where we are standing, we are actually seeing a body of water. But then when we go closer, we discover that there is no water. And another important observation or drishtanta that is taken is the superimposition of a snake on a rope. So therefore, we also have to question what we see and what we hear. So this methodology of questioning and inferring the correct knowledge is called Sankhya. Sankhya itself means correct knowledge. Samyak khyayate iti, that which is properly understood. So Sankhya, Yoga, then we have Nyaya. We use the various methodologies of logic and not delving too much into it, but enough of the Nyaya. Then a not so deeply studied or highly relevant study of Vaisheshika, because it is physics, and so other sciences, scientific studies globally have gone quite advanced, but not to discount some of the visions of the Vaisheshika Darshana either. Then we have the Purva Mimamsa Darshana, which deals with the relationship with various deities, the role of ritual, and how to understand ritual, and what is the correct way of interpreting the Vedic word. Mimamsa Darshana is studied deeply even to this day. Purva Mimamsa Darshana. Then we have also the Uttara Mimamsa or Vedanta. Interestingly, irrespective of what branch of study we take up, let us say that none of us is interested in anything that is related to Indian heritage. We are totally not interested in Indian heritage. Still, study of Yoga Shastra is important. It is because it deals with the mind. And all of us are interested to know our mind, to know the mind of others, and to know the universal mind. And therefore, mind being of extreme interest to everybody, Yoga Shastra and Yoga Darshana has had a very far-reaching effect. In fact, so much so that yoga has been adopted even by other traditions. Though it all started as a Yoga Darshana, which is a Vaidika Darshana, still, for example, the Buddhists totally engaged in yoga, so did the Jainas, and we also see to this day, they even call it as Christian yoga, and every branch of metaphysical thinking all over the world are now interested in Yoga Darshana. And therefore, this Yoga Darshana is actually very, very ancient. Just to track the history of Yoga Darshana, very ancient. So whatever Patanjali has used, or the structure he has used, or the way in which he is presenting the yoga philosophy and practice, because there is both philosophy as well as practice in Patanjali's Yoga Darshana. It is not new. This was not something that Patanjali created. This has been there from the very ancient times. Especially the asana practice, the Hatha Yoga practice can be traced even to pre-Vedic times. We have seen yogic postures in the seals that are unearthed from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. That is the pre-Vedic culture. So therefore, yoga and Yoga Darshana is not something that suddenly a great sage like Patanjali Maharshi came and then he created out of the blue, but it is, there is a long historical tradition that he is an inheritor. And let's see in a moment why he had to resort to actually writing the Yoga Sutras. Because in the methodology of teaching, many teachers have their own devices. In this, one of the things that Patanjali Maharshi did was to create this device of a sutra. And not that the elements of sutra were not present earlier to Patanjali, it was there even in the time of Panini. And sutra is the culmination of a study of a concept for a long time, then a laboratory experimentation that was done by a group of not mere inquisitive people but very scientifically tempered people. And they were the ones who got together, then they created both the practice and theory of how to know the mind. And they had very sophisticated laboratories. And then ultimately, they drew conclusions in this aphoristic formula structure of the Yoga Sutras. So therefore, the device had to be brought by which the Yoga Darshana can be transmitted from teacher to student on the one hand, and another as an important memory device. So Yoga Sutras is written in sutra form, as we have seen earlier. Sutra and the communication through sutra is extremely, extremely effective. I am reminded of the beautiful episode in the Ramayana where Rama and Lakshmana, clad in sannyasa clothes, in ochre robes, but they are carrying weapons. And they walk into Kishkinda. And then Sugriva, of course, is anxious whether they are spies of Ravana. So he asks Hanuman to go and who it is. And Hanuman, very simple, he just approaches them and then he makes this observation saying that both of you are wearing the clothes of sages who are supposed to embrace peace and shanti, but you are carrying weapons. I'm not able to understand this. And I am Anjane Hanuman, who is the chief minister of Sugriva. Kindly tell us who you are. So no greater or extra talking is required, a cryptic. Who are you? Who am I? And I see this, I can't understand how you have the garb of a peaceful person, but you are carrying weapons. Alpaksharam, very, very few words. No ambiguity there. He is not showing any enmity. And his asking Sri Rama and Lakshmana who you are is polite. At the same time, he has got a very clear idea of determining whether they are friends or enemies. Asandigdham. And this small conversation is very, very direct. And it is full of substance, saravata. And this is also universal in approach because whenever we see that two things are together, and those two things do not seem to have anything in common, why are they together? How can two disparate things come together? So please think about this. Mind, subtle. Sattva-guna. Mind, when it is perfectly controlled, can have the vision of Atman. But then we have the Deha, gross. It is inert. This association of an inert body with a Chaitanya Swarupa of the Atman which is reflected in the mind, how is it these two things are together? What is it it is being brought together? So suddenly you see, how did this inert body and the Chaitanya Swarupa Atman come together? And what is influencing which? Is the Chaitanya influencing the Jada Sharira, or is the inert Sharira influencing the Chaitanya? Then we are also seeing some effects. What is the effect? The effect is there are modifications of the mind. So this investigation has been there in all our scriptures right from time immemorial. In fact, we also see the exact Prayoga Tantra. Prayoga Tantra means the methodology of presenting a scripture that you see in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, you can also see in the Maitri Upanishad. So, Patanjali Maharshi has had the access to Maitri Upanishad, which establishes that yoga was actually taught by Hiranyagarbha, the creator of the universe itself. And he contributed, Patanjali Maharshi did contribute to this idea that this has to be an apaurusheyam. That means it cannot be the creation of a human being. Again, you see, how can a human being who is subject to ragadvesha, who is subject to ignorance, avidya, who is subject to the concept of ego, asmita, how can he walk out of the bondage of these kleshas and then know about his own mind? It has to come from a universal mind, and therefore he says it is Hiranyagarbha. And then Maitri Upanishad talks about Hiranyagarbha, or Brahma himself is the origin, and therefore Patanjali also acknowledges and says Anushasanam. I am actually giving you what is already given earlier. So the first thing is Yoga Darshana, that is given in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, is very, very ancient. The vision is very, very ancient. But as I said, Yoga Darshana became necessary because of the indirect accessibility of yoga knowledge, but there was no direct accessibility to the mind. And that is the original contribution of Patanjali. And what advantage did Patanjali have for being able to present the Yoga Sutra in such an extraordinary fashion? It is because he came in the Vedic tradition, and he was a master of the Vedas. And also, he had recognized by his deep study of mind, of medicine, and of language. And that is how he identifies disturbance of the mind is not unique to the mind only. It can be caused by one's health. By the body can do it. And it can be caused by inarticulate speech. Suppose we are not able to speak properly, or if we are not very clear about what we are talking about. Miscommunication, under-communication, over-communication, all of those things can also affect one's mind, and it can also affect the mind of others. So he looked at the problem and said, okay, let me give texts which will address all these three. And he came up with yoga for dealing with the mind, yogena chittasya. Then he wrote a commentary on Panini's Panini's grammar, Ashtadhyayi, and he called it as Mahabhashya. One of the greatest commentaries ever written, the most extraordinary Sanskrit. So any of you who really want to study outstanding Sanskrit, you must study two texts. One is Patanjali's Mahabhashya, and another is Adi Shankara's Bhashya on the Brahma Sutras. Two extraordinary Sanskrit works. Just for the sake of beauty of language, those two have to be studied. So he gave us the Mahabhashya on grammar and proper speech. Padena Vacham. Then he also wrote a book on medicine. Malam Sharirasya cha Vaidyakena. And that is how Patanjali was called as Pravaram Muninam. Vara means excellent. Pravara means super excellent. Among all these sages, a super excellent sage, Pravaram Mulinam, Patanjalim, Pranjali Manatosmi. So we actually came and salute such a sage. What proof do we have that it was Patanjali who gave us definitely the same author of Yoga Sutra and Mahabhashya? There is some doubt about his book on medicine. There is a 4th, 5th century, maybe even a little later than that, commentary on Bhojadeva, the Yoga Sutra, actually 10th, 11th century commentary. And in his Yoga Sutras, he says that Patanjali, who wrote the Mahabhashya and the Yoga Sutras, are one and the same. So the beauty of Sanskrit language, which you see in Mahabhashya, you see also in the Yoga Sutras. Again, Yoga Sutra as a grammatical study also is an outstanding study. So then one of the later authors who was commenting on a work called Vasavadatta, his name was Shivarama. And this Shivarama of Vasavadatta actually also gave us this verse that I just now quoted, Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Cha Vaidyakena Yopakarottam Pravaram Muninam Patanjalim Pranjali Manatosmi. And that we use as a prayer verse whenever we study Yoga Sutra. Then as we study the Yoga Sutras, it would have been impossible for us to understand the sutras without the commentary of the Vyasa Bhashya. Vyasa is not to be confused with the Vyasa of Mahabharata. This is another Vyasa who was flourishing in the 4th, 5th century of the current era. And his Vyasa Bhashya is an indispensable source book for us. If Vyasa had not, if it was not accessible to us, we would not have understood what exactly is Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, or we would have misunderstood. So Vyasa Bhashya is an inevitable source. So in my presentations, I'm going to try to bring together the conceptual ideas of series of Sanskrit commentaries. In Vyasa Bhashya of the 4th, 5th century, then Adi Shankara is supposed to have written a Bhashya. I do have that copy with me, but looking at the Sanskrit of what is called as Shankara Bhashya, there is not a convincing proof that it was written by Adi Shankara. But still it is called a Shankara Bhashya because a lot of Shankaracharyas, the monks, had written many commentaries, and the Shankara Bhashya is there. Then in the 10th century, more critical studies came. There is a book called Tattva Vaisharadi by Vachaspati Mishra, again a wonderful commentary. Then Raja Bhoja himself wrote a commentary called Rajamartanda in the 10th, 11th century. Then on that, an author called Bhava Ganesha wrote a text called Pradeepa. Then in the 17th, 18th century, there was a very great scholar called Nagoji Bhatta, and that Nagoji Bhatta wrote a commentary called Maniprabha. And Vritti, he wrote a Srit Vritti, and Maniprabha is another commentary written by Ramananda Yati. It's about the 20th century. Probably he is from Kerala, and he was another Sanskrit great author. Then Sadashiva Brahmendra, who is well known in musical circles, Sadashiva Brahmendra Saraswati, he has written a book called Yoga Sudhakara. Then there is also a Vijnana Bhikshu's commentary, 15th, 16th century, called Yoga Bhashya Vartika. And then another very good commentary that I read, very fine Sanskrit and lot of information, is Krishna Vallabhacharya of the Vallabhacharya. Probably it is Vallabhacharya himself, his commentary. So these are the source books that I will be looking at, and also, present what I have understood the sutras to be. And so that's why I said this session will be a little more advanced than what we saw in the first pass. But at the same time, please don't, those of you who are new to Yoga Shastra, please don't be threatened or scared away, because we will also go and talk about the fundamentals. So it will be simple enough, but it will also have, hopefully, deeper information. Depends on, how much I have understood these texts. So, Vyasa's Bhashya is a very, very good source. And then, in all our Shastras, we always classify all the Shastras into two kinds. One is called Jijnasa Shastra, and another is called Upadesha Shastra. Two kinds of Shastras are there. Jijnasa Shastra means where there is contemplation. And whenever there is contemplation, there is also a scope for conversation. For example, the Brahma Sutras start with Athato Brahma Jijnasa. Now we shall contemplate on Brahman. So there will be what is known as a Purva Paksha. Purva Paksha means one person or one group, set of persons, they will say, this is how I understand this subject. Say Brahman. One group of people will say, this is Brahman. This is called Purva Paksha. Then there will be another person who will examine the Purva Paksha, and then that person or group of persons will evaluate and analyze. And then there will be a lot of argumentation, back and forth conversation, and finally they come to a conclusion called Siddhanta. Siddhanta means they come to a conclusion. So that is why many of the schools we also call as Siddhanta, Shankara Siddhanta, Ramanuja Siddhanta, Madhva Siddhanta. That means debates have taken place, Purva Paksha has placed their viewpoints, then contemplation has taken place, argumentation has taken place, proof of why I derive this meaning has taken place. So there is a lot of discussion. And Jijnasa Shastra is one such. But Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is not a Jijnasa Shastra, it is a Upadesha Shastra. Upadesha Shastra means what? Here there is no scope for discussion. It is an instruction. It is a anushasana. The teacher will say, you have to do this. Ashtanga Yoga. Yama Niyama Asana Pranayama Pratyahara Dhyana Dharana. Samadhi. You have to do this. You have to follow this process. If you want to control your mind, you have to practice and you have to have a dispassion. Abhyasa Vairagya Abhyam Tannirodha. Chitta Vritti is controlling the mind. No argument, no discussion. It is a Upadesha Shastra. Now the question is, do we need Upadesha Shastra? Everything cannot be argued and Jijnasa cannot become Jijnasa Shastra, because certain practices have to be Upadesha Shastra. We have to tell our child, don't touch the fire, it is going to burn. No question of discussion, argument or Purva Paksha and Siddhanta. So therefore, Upadesha Shastra, Yoga Shastra is after all the Purvacharyas have actually used the methodology established in the Veda, in the Upanishads, in Bhagavad Gita, they have actually put that into practice and come to the conclusion that this is the only way and there is no other way. Because Patanjali Maharshi did have access to all the Upanishads and all the Vedic teaching. And also, I feel that he also had access to the Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, it is a time-tested practice. And therefore, this time-tested practice is only to be known and followed, and therefore, there is no scope for discussion. So we also have to study Yoga Shastra with that spirit. Because suppose we sit and try to keep on arguing, then there will be no possibility of putting it into practice. That is the first observation done by several of the commentators. So again, we have looked at the definition of yoga into two different kinds of derivations. One is yuja samadhau, that is, yoga is for the sake of getting absorption, the samadhi. And we have also looked at yujir yoga, so that the union of two entities. So what are the union of these two entities? Suppose we look at the Upanishads, what is the fundamental message or what is known as pradhana pratijna? So this is a technical term, pradhana pratijna. Pratijna means a mission statement. Pradhana pratijna means a main mission statement, fundamental mission statement of the entire Upanishad is that the individual Chaitanya Swarupa Atman and the universal Brahman is one, is Aikyam. So then, if we just tell people that this your innermost Atman is no different from Brahman, when we make a statement, is it a Upadesha Shastra or a Jijnasa Shastra? However much Jijnasa we do, it is very hard for us to actually realize the unity of the two. And therefore, Upanishads gave us a clue. Kathopanishad particularly gives us a clue. This understanding and this identification cannot be done by mere logic. Na tarkena matimapaniya. This cannot be realized by mere argumentation. All right, why not we study 10 books and then realize that the individual is the same as the universal? Scholarship is not going to help. Na bahuna shrutena. So what is the main means? The means is sit in dhyana, remove all the superimpositions, and then discover the unity of the self. And therefore, even though Upanishad has scope for a lot of argumentation, ultimately it becomes a Upadesha Shastra. So you can see, Yoga Shastra takes a strategy of leaving all the argumentation for other branches of science, takes the essence of the Upanishads, and then establishes that tada drashtaswarupe avasthanam. If you control the modifications of the mind, you will be established in the seer. So therefore, where does Yoga Sutra take off? Yoga Sutra takes off after all argumentation is done. But some of those argumentations are also important for us, even before we enter into the understanding of the yoga suggested by Upanishad. In the yoga suggested by Upanishad, it discusses about the conflict between emotion and the intellect. So look at the example of Kathopanishad. In Kathopanishad, Nachiketa is seeing that his father is giving away useless cows as a gift. So therefore he is distressed. When Nachiketa gets distressed by his father giving away useless cows, it is an emotional issue, isn't it? In the context, he is disturbed in the mind. But then as soon as the father says, I am going to give you to death mrityave tvam dadami, it becomes an intellectual issue. Why is it my father wants me to go to Yama? So please note that Yoga Shastra again takes off where there is a conflict in our personality, where our emotion wants us to do something, then the intellect will come and say that what you are feeling is not practical and you have to take a practical decision. So how do we resolve this conflict between the emotion and the intellect? We need yoga. And therefore we need Patanjali. Whenever we have got to resolve the Upanishadic context which raises the issue of the Hardika Bauddhika. I'm just giving you some Sanskrit terms so you can think about it. That coming from the heart, emotions, and the intellectual. So what did the Vedas do? The Vedas created the ritual of yajna. So now you look at the Vedic yajna as a yajna agni. What we do is in this yajna agni, our emotional feelings and stresses and the intellectual doubts, both of them are offered into the yajna agni as an oblation. And both of them are actually processed by this jnana agni, by this fire of knowledge. And when the fire of knowledge cleanses this both of them, then all the guna pravaha. See, I'm using this term guna pravaha because constantly mind flows from sattva guna to rajo guna to tamo guna and back. Keeps flowing. And every time it is passing through these sattva rajas tamo gunas, the proportion of the sattva rajas tamo guna combinations which affect both our thinking as well as our feeling, emotion and the intellect keeps going in waves and waves and waves. So therefore chitta bhranti takes place. Upanishad identifies the chitta bhranti. If you look at the introduction to all the Upanishads, it always starts from chitta bhranti, isn't it? Ishavasya Upanishad starts with the idea, is the world enveloped by Ishvara? When you say the world is enveloped by Ishvara, the lingering doubt, is Ishvara there, has to be processed. There is some Brahma there. When Kenopanishad starts with Kenoshitam patade preshatam manaha, by whose inspiration this mind falls on any idea, object, there is the guna pravaha. So therefore, Upanishad now comes to the conclusion, because of ahankara, mamakara, the individual is creating a bondage for himself. So we are all tied up. So how to untie this? And then for the sake of untying, we have to see what is this rope made up of. This rope is made up of the 5 organs of knowledge, Pancha Jnanendriyas, then Pancha Bhutas, the 5 elements that are there in the world, the interaction between the Pancha Bhutas and Pancha Jnanendriyas, with the intervention of the mind, Manas, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahankara, then what happens? It is thrown into this boiling water of the mind, of this emotional mind. And so the Kathopanishad now talks about saying when the Panchajnanendriyas along with the mind is made peaceful and the intellect becomes steady, and that state is Paramagatihi, is the highest state. So the idea is that the 5 organs of knowledge mainly, and the Manas, Buddhi, Chitta, Ahankara, especially Manas, establishes itself in the Buddhi, then a person is in Parama Shanti. In other words, Sthira Indriya. That is all the Pancha Jnanendriyas. See, if the Pancha Jnanendriyas are not active, the 5 Karmendriyas do not do anything. Isn't it? Only when the organs of knowledge are active, organs of action become active. Please contemplate on this point. Without the organs of knowledge, the organs of action do not do anything. We don't even lift our hand. And therefore, organs of knowledge and the mind have to be brought into control, and therefore organs of knowledge plus, that is 5 organs of knowledge plus Manas, these 6 Shat Indriyas, these 6 Indriyas are to be Dharana. So we're going to talk about Dharana as one of the Ashtanga Yogas. And that Dharana is Yoga. How do we know that we have achieved that state? We know that state because there is no Pramada. So Pramada, Prama means what? Knowledge. Pramada means wrong knowledge. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is there will be no Pramada when the 5 organs of knowledge and the Manas is in a balanced state. So Upanishad also already has established that we have got to bring the mind under control, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, and Patanjali Maharshi had the source of Upanishads to come up with that sutra. Then he has to use the world. So as he is getting more and more skilled in using the resources of the world, Prithvi, Apaha, Tejo, Vayu, Akasha, then obviously he will start getting command over the various elements. At some micro level, we also have a command. All we have to do is we have built a home, in a home where we have heat, a home where we have got air conditioning, a home where no insects can come inside. That means we have achieved certain mastery over the environment because of our engineering skill. It is a vibhuti. It is a power. And therefore, Yoga Sutra also talks about such powers. So you can see that Yoga Sutra draws many ideas from the Upanishads, and especially it takes up a very important mantra where the Upanishad says, you take the Omkara as the bow. Take the Omkara as the bow. I am quoting from Mundaka Upanishad. And then you take the Atma as that is the self, the individual self, as the arrow. And then the object of the arrow to be shot at is Brahman. And with complete focus, when you release this arrow, it goes and becomes one with Brahman. So what is yoga? Yoga is this chitta vritti, which has to establish itself in the seer. Tada drashtuhu surupe avasthanam. So we are going to have this one sutra as the basis of our study. Every sutra and every concept we study, we have to come back and say, how does this contribute to chitta vritti nirodha? This action, this thought, this idea, this concept, how does it support chitta vritti nirodha? That will be the approach that we will take. Then the prashanta chittata takes place. The rajoguna will actually get reduced. And when the rajoguna is gone, the kalmashas, all the impurities are gone, then a person becomes yogi. Now the question is it accessible to each and every one of us in this assembly? Or is it only something for specialized people? Is it possible for you and me? Patanjali Maharshi promises it is for us. Each and every one of us can do that. We may not be able to do what the Kundalini Yoga talks about. Because the Kundalini Yoga talks about the coiled serpent in the Mooladhara chakra, and then you have to awaken this Kundalini and bring up to the 6 chakras, and that is for the specialist. But Yoga Sutra and Patanjali Yoga Darshana is not meant for any truly difficult, challenging project. And the beauty of Yoga Sutra, just like Bhagavad Gita, is we don't have to change our lifestyle at all. There's nothing extra we have to do. Only thing we have to do is to be aware and then enter into the world with the knowledge of the Yoga Sutras and learn to stand a little apart from whatever is happening around us. That is all, even for a brief moment. That is why we have to stand senayor ubhayor madhye ratham sthapayame achyuta. In the middle of the two armies, please stop my ratha. Ratha is our body. So when we sit there, when we sit in the middle of this war, but we are fully equipped with the bow, the arrow, and all the arsenal, all the astras and shastras, and a great Sarathi, Partha Sarathi is there. With all those things, he says only one thing: practice, practice, practice. Where? Everywhere. Every point of time. And for this, only Upadesha Shastra can help. Because suppose Patanjali Maharshi had tried to build an argumentative darshana like Mimamsa or Nyaya, then we would have spent the whole life in arguing only and not putting anything into practice. So you can see how beautifully Patanjali Maharshi says, Tapaswadhyaya Eshwara Pranidhanani. You do these three things. Observe everything that is going around you with a critical eye. That is tapas. Critical eye means what? With an eye that where we do not impose our gunas on our observation. That's critical eye. Tapaswadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhanani Kriya Yogaha. Do worship and see. Study scripture and find out. Think and determine. So like that, Patanjali Maharshi gives complete instructions of how one can really control the chitta vritti. So therefore, he has to build a case for that. And he has to do it in as brief text as possible. So we can easily memorize. It's so easy to memorize the 195 sutras, it's like 4 or 5 times. If you just read through, you will actually get it by heart. So the beauty about learning it by heart is when we face with some challenges. I'll give you one example, which, as I am personally going through that with Usha's health. So what do? Patanjali Maharshi himself gives us a beautiful clue by saying chitta vritti, and then the manashanti is disturbed by dukkha daurmanasya vyadhi. So vyadhi disturbs. Vyadhi, my vyadhi, or the vyadhi of somebody whom I care for, can be very, very disturbing. So how does Yoga Sutra help us? For a moment, you stand apart and then you do the Pratipaksha Bhavana. And he gives us the clue how to do Pratipaksha Bhavana. He says you show total amount of Karuna and Maitri. So when a person is displaying, when either one's own sickness or another sick person's sickness, when we show Maitri and Karuna, then we are dealing with simultaneously the chitta vritti of oneself and the chitta vritti of the other person also. How much of chances of field that we have in the world. And also, a little bit of vairagya is also very important. Abhyasa, vairagya, abhyam, tan nirodha. So what is the vairagya? It is, again, Patanjali Maharshi himself has given us a sutra, janma, then jati, ayuhu, bhoga. When do we take birth? How long we are going to live? What are going to be our experiences in the world? These are all part of the cosmic structure. And in this cosmic structure, suppose we are able to actually do the chitta vritti nirodha at the time when it is required, then what happens? Efficiency in actually dealing with the situation comes without ourselves breaking down. This is where Patanjali Maharshi's contribution, because he is so compassionate, if his text was not available, then we really could not have had a powerful teacher to handle our chitta vrittis. So that is why this text becomes an absolutely inevitable study. So with this introduction, in the next class, we will see an overview of the entire theme, that is all the four chapters, what is it they convey, and then we'll take each one of these sutras, and mainly I will base our discussion on a couple of the commentaries that I just quoted. We will go to the original commentators and then see how they have taught us. And of course, I'm sure you also have many source books. So we'll take that, and then we'll try to define the many technical terms, and then we'll study this time all the 195 sutras. Thank you.